Who is Daphne Blake? A history of Daphne, Scooby-Doo, and cultural movements. I must confess that I fell into a similar trap that many do when they think about Daphne Blake. I thought she was just a girly girl stereotype with no interesting influences, specifically because there was nothing distinct about her I could identify in the beginning. Fred is often a leader or the van driver known for engineering traps, Velma a bookworm with a knack for science, and Shaggy a scaredy cat athlete who eats and runs at record speeds. But Daphne has always just been remembered by many as the pretty fashionable one, the damsel caught by the villain, and in some reboots, just the rich girl who's dating Fred. But as I looked back at the character more, I found a different Daphne. A girl who talks like Thalia Menninger and looks and thinks like Nancy Drew. A character who has evolved with the changing of our culture, constantly being reinvented or updated with new female tropes. In a franchise that has been rebooted for more than 50 years, seen by multiple generations, including my own. So let's solve the mystery of who is Daphne Blake, and how she went from this to this. But before we get started, here's a quick spoiler and content warning, as the following movies, series, and specials will be talked about in detail, including iconic scenes from outside the Scooby-Doo franchise. We will also be discussing sexualization, harassment, and body dysmorphia, but because of the delicate nature of these topics, they are not expanded upon deeply in this video. The origins. To understand Daphne, we need to go back further than the franchise's original 1969 series, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, and place ourselves in the minds of the creatives who designed and wrote these characters. Despite wanting to come up with original ideas, most people, especially with the pressure of marketability, fall back on media they know and love, and oftentimes in television, fall back on formulas, genres, and character tropes that are proven to hold and engage an audience. Because at the end of the day, the studios, publishers, and producers need to make money. To create this now iconic franchise of teenagers driving around in a van with a talking dog, solving mysteries, the show needed to research and draw from detective and mystery genres, especially from what was popular with children, since they were the target audience. From what I can find online, many people credit the 1939 to 1944 radio show I Love a Mystery for directly influencing the creators of Scooby-Doo. This show was about a detective agency who traveled the world and had adventures. But in my quest to find the direct influences of Daphne herself, I couldn't help but notice that this particular show, despite having a woman voice actress on the team, followed a cast of only male protagonists. This led me to none other than the Queen of Mysteries herself, Nancy Drew, who today is still ongoing since her debut in 1930 with more than 600 books. Her popularity as a fashionable teenage detective resulted in the creation of not one, but 4 films in the late 1930s. They included car chase scenes, villain kidnappings, and even flying in planes. Some unique aspects of Nancy Drew was not only how they emphasized her femininity through her fashion, but also how independent they wrote her to be in this period of time. She has recognition for her work, a boyfriend who supports her detective career, and she drives herself around in a blue roadster. By today's standards, she sounds pretty modern for the 1930s, but then again, it is partially her social class that allows her this freedom at this time. Nancy Drew laid the foundation for Daphne Blake to be a hyper-feminine mystery solver, and proved that girly girls and action stories sold. Not only does she have the same taste as Daphne, sporting red hair in her 1960s illustrated covers, but they are also the same age at 16. Nancy didn't always have red hair and started as a blonde, making me wonder if the red hair girl personality trope in the media has something to do with this transition, or if it's simply the popularity of red hair dye at this time. As the stereotype goes, that blondes are quote-unquote dumb and redheads are fiery. And certainly Daphne in the original series is known for her occasional snap and sass. He better hope I don't catch him, I'll make him pay for what he did to my hair. A less obvious and talked about influence for Daphne Blake comes from a television sitcom that laid the foundation for all 4 of the characters' personality dynamics, called The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, which aired from 1959 to 63. As discussed in my previous videos, Zelda inspired Velma's wit, style, and brain, Dobie Fred's overall style and confidence, and Maynard Shaggy's laid-back appearance and comedic personality. But seeing as so much of the gang was inspired or completely ripped off characters from Dobie Gillis, I couldn't help but notice I couldn't find an obvious Daphne character influence. That is till I revisited the first few episodes and found Thalia Menninger. I was surprised that Daphne took influence from Thalia Menninger at first. In most modern adaptations of Daphne, she's a rich girl, similar to Nancy Drew, with enough money to support an endless wardrobe. I expected her to be based off a fashionista character like Veronica from the Archie comics, but besides liking fashion and wearing a headband, I soon realized that Veronica and Daphne have nothing in common. Veronica is often a catalyst for discourse and can be quite annoying, while Daphne has a softer voice in comparison. And the only thing annoying about her is the unfortunate amount of times she supposedly gets kidnapped. More on that later. Instead, I found sweet, soft-spoken Thalia, who's adorable, ladylike, and fashionable, but is most notably not rich. In fact, she's actually quite money conscious. In the show, she is one of the first love interests of Dobie Gillis. He falls head over heels for her immediately, as the show is a comedy, but she constantly turns him down because he doesn't have enough money to take care of her, despite liking him a little. My sister married a poor, goofy boy like you. Now he lives with my folks and eats his own weight every day. I can't bring home another mouth to feed. My father is 60 years old and has a kidney condition. She's a woman with limited options in 1959, looking for social and economic mobility. She is soft but stern and determined with her own goals and understanding of her reality. Daphne, voiced by Indira Stefaniana in the original series, takes after Thalia's soft-spoken yet stern voice, overall stylistic appearance, and logical thinking. Like Thalia, Daphne is a cautious character. She sees dangers and potential problems and points out characteristics about the places we, the audience, are about to go to, oftentimes relaying that something about the place feels creepy or unsettling, before it's revealed what exactly is lurking there. Now, before we continue, we need to address the elephant in the room. Daphne's notorious nickname, Danger-Prone Daphne. Because how can she be both observant and logical if she has a reputation for vanity and being kidnapped? The Danger-Prone nickname. To answer these questions, I needed to go back and watch the original series with a pair of fresh eyes. What I encountered in the first season of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Was the hindsight perspective that the show, having no popularity yet, was getting its footing. There were no iconic lines like, I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids, nor let's split up gang. But there was a really good episode formula, and this interesting balance within the group's dialogue. It felt as if no member of the group wasn't important, because they were taking turns asking questions, brainstorming, and finding clues. This is a common dialogue formula found in children's mystery novels, such as the highly influential series, The Hardy Boys, which dates back to 1927, and its sibling series, Nancy Drew. These two ghost-written series, which occasionally experience crossovers, paved the way for the Scooby-Doo gang's formulaic approach to mystery writing. The dialogue helped explain what characters were seeing in an engaging way, without the long descriptive paragraphs on their surroundings, as the characters would make observations for the reader. And a mysterious hook thrown at you in the beginning of the story served as a direct way to hold your attention and draw you in quickly. "Girls, look," she cried out. Bess and George gazed downward just in time to see 4 horses pulling an old stagecoach. There was no driver. According to the article, The Mystery of the Hardy Boys and the Invisible Authors by Daniel A. Gross, The Atlantic, the secret behind the longevity of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys is simple. They're still here because their creators found a way to minimize cost, maximize output, and standardize creativity. The solution was an assembly line that made millions by turning writers into anonymous freelancers, a business model that is central to the internet age. This assembly line of writing created an episodic-style book series that lent well to influencing episodic weekly cartoons. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the ghostwriters from these series worked on Scooby-Doo or other mystery-focused television shows as well. And even if they didn't, we know their work influenced Scooby-Doo because of lines like this in page 3 of The Clue in the Old Stagecoach. "We have a mystery on our hands." Written a decade prior to Scooby-Doo's release. Besides having a balance in its approach to drawing you into the mystery, the original Scooby-Doo series also has a balance between the gender pairings. Velma and Fred behave like leaders, being the most assertive characters, while Shaggy and Daphne often were portrayed as the most cautious, having their own side quests that result in them finding clues. In fact, Daphne's first kidnappings or danger moments are balanced out by other characters also getting trapped or in other episodes getting into trouble. It's never just her, and she sometimes gets out of the situations herself, determined to continue mystery solving. Perhaps the most striking side quest I encountered in the first season with Daphne was in episode 11, A Gaggle of Galloping Ghosts, which features the third time Daphne is separated somehow from the main group because of danger. But this separation by a drawbridge and chase along the moat by monsters, although resulting in her getting locked in a dungeon, doesn't mean her character is useless. In fact, when they find her again, helping her up from the lower level, she reveals that she wrote down a clue she found down there. This episode is one of the most Daphne-driven, as she even has the final line when talking to the police. The first 11 episodes of Scooby-Doo never feel sexist in my opinion. The dynamics of the gang feel natural and not overly exaggerated. Besides, of course, Shaggy being Shaggy. In fact, Daphne's arm-grabbing moments for Fred's support is balanced by the never-ending examples of Velma standing on her own, giving us two different examples of mystery-solving girls, one who leans on someone else for support, and another who supports herself independently. So, while Velma is out there breaking stereotypical norms, Daphne is given stereotypical feminine characteristics, like not liking messy places and being compassionate towards others. She is often the one in the group to give out Scooby snacks and is not afraid to hit someone over the head when needed. It's not until episode 12, Scooby-Doo and a Mummy 2, that we first hear this balance of respect in the group go out the window, and we encounter Daphne's notorious nickname in the series. Oh no, danger-prone Daphne turned on the power saw. Out of 25 episodes of the original series, the nickname is only said twice to Daphne. Once by Velma, and a second time by Fred in Season 2, Episode 4. And both times it's said in annoyance because Daphne made something go seriously wrong for the members of the group. Although it doesn't happen often, this new trope for Daphne is used by the writers as a way to create conflict and help the plot keep moving forward. But even if it helps give conflict and humor to the story, it does in a way demean her. And as the most hyper-feminine character example in the group, look down on quote-unquote vain and fashionable girls at the time. Now that they have written a pattern for the characters to occasionally make fun of Daphne by calling her names, they are also inviting children watching to laugh and get annoyed at her as well, and remember the nicknames. For example, in this clip from 1973, the new Scooby-Doo movies, The Haunted Carnival, Fred calls her Daffy Daphne, and Velma makes a joke about women, although acknowledging that she is one as well, because Daphne stopped for a moment of vanity to go take pictures in a photo booth, resulting in her getting kidnapped. Velma and Fred are the only ones who call Daphne names and discuss being annoyed by her. In contrast, Shaggy only ever pokes fun at her. Looks like Daphne wants to scare up a couple new boyfriends. Daphne, very funny. As it wouldn't make sense for him to get annoyed with her when he gets into just as much trouble. But this line does create the first moment in the show that boyfriends are brought up. Alongside the characters getting annoyed by her, there's a very subtle and not so subtle sexualization of Daphne by the writers. They have her say innuendo lines like, "I've heard of things that go bump in the night, but do you have to bump so hard?" And recycle animations of her being tied up and gagged or drawn in positions that really draw attention to her body. In all seriousness, it's unsettling, especially when you remember that this character is supposed to be a 16-year-old girl. I think I'll leave it at that. But now that we know the beginnings of this compassionate and hyper-feminine detective, with a reputation for disaster, it's time to explore what happened in the late 70s to 80s that ultimately changed Daphne Blake for the better. The Dark 80s. There came a point after 10 years and 89 episodes about the core mystery gang that the showrunners decided it was time to change up the dynamics and formula of the franchise by removing everyone in the gang except Shaggy and Scooby. The new show called Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, which aired in 1979, featured a new character called Scrappy, Scooby's nephew, and ran till 1982. By then, they realized they needed something different as the show's popularity was dropping. So what did they do? They brought back Daphne Blake. But they didn't just bring her back. they updated her character as well. This series aired in 1983 and is called The New Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo Show. But now that the show is focused on the two most passive characters, a leadership void was left to fill. In the original group dynamics, Velma and Fred always led the group with confidence, having had the strongest personalities. But now that they are gone, Daphne's personality changes and grows. She takes on Fred's old job as the van driver and says things like, "Let's split up," or "unmask a villain." She even has knowledge on legends at times, a very Velma trait. She doesn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, no longer having her cautious sayings from the original series about how creepy a place is, and will drag the boys into their next adventures. Because Fred is no longer there, she isn't grabbing his arm anymore. Now, she feels like a more confident and independent character. We even see the first appearances of her love for journalism, as she sometimes carries a camera to document their adventures in articles, a career path that future reboots will latch onto. She still gets trapped or kidnapped, but here she is never blamed for it. And because she has a leadership role in the group, she often finds a way out or solutions to their problems. The next show after this series continues these new characteristics of Daphne. In the 1985 series, 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo. This is also the first time Daphne gets an outfit update, as her 1969 design is now 16 years out of date. The first look we see her in this new show is important to her overall change as a character, as its resemblance to the 1976 to 81 ABC show, Charlie's Angels, is almost unmistakable. Not only has Daphne's confidence been continued in the series, but they are dressing her more maturely and referencing famous action women. Out of all the Scooby-Doo series so far, this is the first time the show actually feels, in some way, slightly scary and dangerous, as it is the first time the supernatural and monster elements of the show are real. This change in tone is riding the 1980s dark fantasy movement, which was a trend of cartoons and films that explored stories following the hero's journey and pushed the boundary of what themes children could handle, such as discussing feelings of oppression, hopelessness, and confronting the reality of death, all while embracing the supernatural in worlds filled with creatures. This resulted in a plethora of media, such as The Secret of Nim, The Dark Crystal, The Last Unicorn, Never-Ending Story, The Black Cauldron, An American Tale, Labyrinth, Willow, The Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and many, many more. Stretching into the 90s with 1992 Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest, and the 96 movie The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And these influences can be seen in the 13 Ghosts series, as not only does all 13 episodes explore a singular storyline, building up on one another, but also different dark fantasy and horror tropes are explored as well, such as Daphne's dramatic transformation after drinking wolfsbane into a werewolf, which references famous transformation sequences such as the 1981 horror movie The Howl, and alternate realities where Daphne is shown older and in the control and servitude of a ghost. But what follows after this interesting new dark feel for the show is a completely opposite feeling reboot from 1988 to 91, called A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, where the franchise decided to rewind the clock and make all the original characters children. But of course, their personalities here have been altered to be, at least what I thought as a kid watching the reruns, really annoying and rude. It is in this series where the obnoxious and vain Daphne re-emerges, and the trope of Daphne being a little rich girl begins. Now, I'm not going to explore this series much as we have a lot to discuss with the next Scooby-Doo era, but I think this moment really sums her character up, as child Daphne really hates to get her go-go boots dirty. The Mook movies. We're finally here. The 98 Scooby-Doo revival, which beckoned a glorious age of great Scooby-Doo content. And no, I am totally not completely biased because this is my generation's Scooby-Doo, which, might I add, had one of the best songs. I'm looking at you, 2002. But in all seriousness, the Scooby-Doo franchise was experiencing a dead period in the 90s. Originally, the show was shown on CBS from 1969 to 76. Then it switched to ABC until 91, with A Pup Named Scooby-Doo being its last original show on ABC. But from 91 to 98, Scooby-Doo experienced 7 years of absence of new series/shows, relying on reruns on Cartoon Network in the 90s to stay alive in the minds of children. But what got this new age for the series kicking was the direct-to-video release of 4 different animated films over the course of 4 years and television specials. And for anyone watching young enough not to remember what that means, a direct-to-video release is when a movie doesn't go to the theater, but instead it goes straight to you. In the late 90s, that meant VHS tapes. But once we enter the 2000s, it starts to mean DVDs, both of which could be rented or bought. Cries in the last generation to remember Blockbuster. And since the franchise was experiencing animation studio issues at this time, with no contract to broadcast a new show, direct-to-video was ideal. This resulted in 4 core movies, known as the Mook movies, because they were animated in partnership with Mook Animations in Japan. Zombie Island, The Witch's Ghost, Alien Invaders, and Cyber Chase. The first movie, Scooby-Doo and Zombie Island, released on September 22nd, 1998, with the premise of making this movie a reunion story for both the audiences and the gang themselves. To put this in perspective, a 10-year-old kid in 1969 watching Scooby-Doo was 20 by 1979, then 30 in 1989, and 40 in 1999. Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island was the first time in at least 20 years that the full gang had been brought back together, and because time had passed for the audience, they made time pass for the gang, aging them up to somewhere in their 20s, as Daphne in the movie is established to have made a career as a reporter, with a show called Coast to Coast with Daphne Blake, a successful syndicated series on Americana, going on its 2nd season with a new series of segments called Haunted America. This job is perfect for Daphne, as she has always been established as a curious and observational character, reinvented in the late 70s to push Shaggy and Scooby into different situations in search of her scoop. And with the stereotype that reporters are pretty and have to look picture perfect all the time for the camera, it's the perfect job for her. Daphne's new career path is riding the popularity of paranormal television, a genre of reality TV that spawned in the late 80s and continued into the 90s and 2000s, with popular shows like the 91 to 95 Haunted Lives True Ghost Stories and the 91 to 97 show Sightings. The movie opens in classic Scooby-Doo fashion to remind the audience what the gang used to look like and do. But soon it's revealed that this is just Daphne narrating in an interview the glory days of the gang, who went their separate ways because their jobs got boring, as every mystery they went to solve was always just some guy in a mask. Now with Fred as her producer and one-man crew, she's determined to go find herself real monsters and supernatural places in America to record for her show. But she also reveals that she misses all the members of the gang and how they used to be. This is the catalyst that brings the gang back together, because Fred decides that the best birthday gift he can give Daphne is a mystery-solving reunion. This new iteration of Daphne is at its core very wholesome, as the Mook movies really lean into Daphne's loving and compassionate nature that was shown in bits and pieces in the previous series. And besides that, it's really lovely to see how in this version, they show the gang's love for Daphne, intending to mend a lot of the bad moments from the first few series. This movie sets you up to think that everything is going to be like the original, with the monsters being fake, until it's revealed that everything is very much real and darker than ever before. I mean, it's immortal werecat people who own a pepper plantation and killed and buried the bodies of their victims on the land who are now zombies trying to get revenge. There's even voodoo dolls, villagers eaten by alligators, and creepy werecat transformations that are reminiscent of Daphne's 80s werewolf scene. If that does not sound like horror, I don't know what is. Overall, the tone and vibe of the franchise was reinvented with a single movie, fully embracing dark fantasy and horror for a varied audience of both nostalgic adults and 90s desensitized children, who were used to watching scary films like Gremlins, Aliens, Terminator, and Jurassic Park. I mean, alongside the Mook movies was also a direct parody special for Halloween of the Blair Witch film on Cartoon Network. This 1999 special was called The Scooby-Doo Project, and in my opinion, it's one of the best finds digging into the world of the franchise. And although it didn't reveal much to me about Daphne, it did highlight how much the franchise was trying to revive itself by embracing the horror genre even more. Another special that aired on Cartoon Network was the October 1998 series of 8 shorts called Those Meddling Kids, aka Scooby-Doo Behind the Scenes, which featured the animated gang talking about themselves during a 25-hour Scooby-Doo marathon to help kick off the gang's revival. In it, we learn that Daphne also is smart, having straight A's in school, and was the one to get the gang's first investment check. This $100 came from her father, who would carpool them around in their younger years, but wasn't supportive of Daphne running into abandoned buildings. This lack of parental support is extended to her mother, who can be heard in the background sighing dramatically when Daphne answers what she wants to be when she grows up: a supermodel and a detective. We get quips from Velma talking about Daphne wearing pumps in a swamp that call back to her go-go boot days, and the answer to one of the biggest fan questions: is Daphne dating Fred? This question alone opens a new aspect that Daphne never explored before: relationships. Scooby-Doo has always stayed away from romance, but the Mook movies decided it was time to talk about it, having not only Shaggy and Scooby fall in love with alien girls and alien invaders, giving us one of the saddest cartoon romantic scenes ever, but also finally starting the conversation of what exactly Fred and Daphne mean to each other. As in Zombie Island, the two can be seen experiencing jealousy over each other's interactions with attractive people. This jealousy is contrasted with the interview specials' exclamations from both Daphne and Fred that they are just friends, starting what is now called the friends to lovers trope between the two. And it is during a jealous spat in the woods where we encounter the second big change given to Daphne in the Mook movies, when Daphne flips a zombie over her shoulder and tells Fred, "I can handle myself, thank you." This line is the first time we feel the new independent era of Daphne Blake. Although not blatantly explained in the movie, 2001 Cyber Chase explores that line further by directly contrasting the new Daphne to the old, in one of the most memorable moments in the franchise's history. Sucked into a video game with a monster on the loose, the gang meets the younger versions of themselves, created by their friend and his memory of how they last appeared to him. When adult Daphne meets teenage Daphne, they at first share a humorous moment, commenting on the differences in their fashions. But then we get a one-on-one adventure of the two inside a haunted house. In this moment, the Daphnes stop themselves from falling into a trapdoor, with adult Daphne closing it to keep them safe and leading her younger self away. They then have a heart-to-heart in front of a funhouse mirror where younger Daphne fears she looks fat, but older Daphne consoles her by telling her, "It's just a trick mirror, you look perfect." This moment, looking back now, is one of the most heartbreaking, because it's a moment of someone talking to their younger self who needed to hear it. In an era where many viewers who lived through the 90s and 2000s were dealing with toxic body ideals and dysmorphia when they looked in the mirror. After this moment, we encounter a monster, and teenage Daphne is immediately frightened, asking, "What do we do?" But unlike the past, when Daphne always needed to be saved by someone else, adult Daphne takes charge and saves both herself by triggering the trapdoor and locking the monster under the floor. It's in this masterful yet simple scene where Daphne feels like she has come full circle, giving us not only sympathy and compassion for her younger self, but also acknowledging that she underwent maturement in her life that made her stronger as a character, beckoning on her new era as adult Daphne exclaims, "Way to go, girl." The No More Damsels 2000s. What I remember most from the late 90s to 2015 popular media is an overwhelming cultural movement to subvert the damsel in distress stereotype and give little girls quote-unquote strong woman role models. This shift was part of the women's empowerment movement, with the goal of not only proving that girls can do what boys do, but also addressing different women's issues such as workplace discrimination. And it's in this era of consciously producing more empowered women characters that Daphne has given special attention. But to further explore this change of Daphne from a damsel to something else, we need to investigate the four main female tropes that were widespread at this point: the fantasy damsel, the girl boss, the hot action girl, and the supposedly average teen girl. Now, most of these tropes in some way can be seen in how Daphne was rewritten for the 2002 live-action film Scooby-Doo, which not only is considered one of the best cartoon live-action adaptations, but also was highly successful at the box office, making $275.7 million on a budget of $84 million. Although the film has a good balance of all the characters and their problems, I couldn't help but notice how Daphne was written with the strongest character arc and moments. And since this film is targeted toward an adult audience, it's filled with adult humor. opening the writer's room to finally address through comedy the underlying uneasiness I felt with the original series, the sexualization of Daphne. This can be seen when she quite literally opens the movie kidnapped and is uncomfortable because the ghost is sexually harassing her, later exclaiming to the others, "Some plan, that ghost pawed me for an hour and a half." But instead of addressing that issue, it's entirely ignored by the others as not a big deal, and entirely Daphne's fault for being so easily kidnapped. This comedic jab at Daphne being harassed is a direct callback to the strange moments of the original cartoon, and it's a style of humor that is prevalent in many 80s, 90s, and 2000s films. This is one of the reasons why she is fed up with the group, as she feels like she is not a valued member and is seen as useless, giving us a dramatic end to the gang, unlike Zombie Island, which had a more positive separation. Not only does this movie bring back Velma and Fred's annoyance and dismissal of Daphne from the original series, but Daphne herself addresses what will be her whole struggle as a character. I am so over this damsel in distress nonsense. Opening the door to our first category of popular female tropes that helped influence Daphne's new direction, the fantasy damsel. I categorize the fantasy damsel trope as a girl who goes against social norms and turns fighter or warrior to defend herself and or her people. The most classic example of this trope is 2001 DreamWorks Shrek, as the film consciously is mocking Disney, giving us Princess Fiona, a damsel who has lived most of her life in a tower, yet has the ability to fight. Another iconic example is when Arwen, a noblewoman who disguises herself Mulan style in the 2003 Lord of the Rings film, epically declared, "I am no man," as she killed the Witch King, saving the realms. Now, Daphne doesn't completely fit in the normal use of damsel subversion, but what she does do is go through her own journey off-screen to strengthen herself into a fighter. I'm a black belt now. I've transformed my body into a weapon. A weapon we don't see till the end of the movie, but more on that later. The second category is the girl boss, who fights to gain recognition in usually male-dominated fields, or prejudiced environments. Examples of this are Elle Woods going to Harvard Law in Legally Blonde, What, Like It's Hard? And my favorite, Erin Brockovich, a true story about a single mother with a photographic memory who fights to be taken seriously when she discovers and builds a case against a major company, illegally polluting a town's water supply. These people don't dream about being rich. They dream about being able to watch their kids swim in a pool without worrying that they'll have to have a hysterectomy at the age of 20. Although comically failing or having strange logic throughout the movie, Daphne attempts to hold herself like a girl boss, trying to appear strong and in control when all the others see is a pretty girl. Despite this, she does manage to find a major clue and escape a trap. But eventually, she falls victim to a wrestler villain and is kidnapped. Side note, the film's dialogue really lays it on thick, with even the wrestler calling her a damsel in distress. Our third trope is the hot action girl, who fights in dramatic or stylized ways, often using her appearance to manipulate others or just look sexy for the audience. These characters include Sarah Connor from Terminator, Trinity from Matrix, and of course, Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. And this is the category that most fits Daphne at the climax of the movie. She needs to open the skylight to let the sun into the cavern below to kill the monsters and save the gang. But the wrestler villain who captured her before appears again to stop her. But instead of being scared and caught off guard, this is the moment when we see what Daphne turned herself into during her time away from the gang. She became a fighting badass. Not only do we get some impressive wire work and hyper-stylized fighting in these scenes, but we also get a direct reference to the 2000s Charlie's Angels films with the mid-air spin and tight jumpsuit. And if you recall, this is not the first time Daphne in some way has referenced Charlie's Angels. This is a great moment to also mention that the actress they casted to play Daphne in this movie is Sarah Michelle Prince, aka the girl who plays Buffy in the then ongoing extremely popular television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And the man who she married a few months after the movie's release is none other than the actor playing Fred. This badass version of Daphne continued into the 2004 live-action sequel, Scooby-Doo Monsters Unleashed, where she has a whole fighting sequence with the Knight from the first episode of the original series. But why does this new fighting version of Daphne kind of make sense in terms of fixing the dynamics of the gang? Well, if we look back and think about high school stereotypes, the opposite of Velma, who is nerdy, is the popular girl who normally is a cheerleader, meaning they updated Daphne by leaning into her being the athletic girl representation to balance out Velma's nerdy library girl personality. I'm apprehensive to call this fighting version of Daphne a proper fix to her character though, and consider it a result of her times, as its comedic quality was riding the high of the hot action girl fix, where many women characters to quote-unquote empower or show women's strength were made unrealistically strong or supernaturally powerful to be able to have equal footing with the men. And as the trope became overused, even into our current day, many audiences see it as a cop-out and a lazy way to write female characters, because feminine strength doesn't always have to mean brute strength. The sporty Daphne also continued into future films in the 2000s, like the 2009 movie Scooby-Doo and the Samurai Sword. But in this new era where there was a new animated movie left and right, instead of focusing on exactly what happened in each, we're going to discuss one final general widespread addition to Daphne's character going forward. But to do this, we need to analyze our final trope category, the average teen girl, who is not only fabulous, but also has romantic subplots and a career fighting evil. This invaded the cartoon space, starting with the classic anime Sailor Moon, which inspired a plethora of girly media like Totally Spies and the Italian cartoon Winx Club. The way this impacts Daphne is the general fantasy consensus that girls with careers like detectives are allowed to dress fashionable and at times impractical without scorn. Before, there were always comments or jabs at Daphne wearing impractical shoes on their adventures, starting with the infamous go-go boot in the mud scenes from A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. But what this new Daphne evolved into that I love so much is the fact that although she may say ew at getting dirty, she now comes prepared on her adventures with spares. This carried on in the 2020 film Scoob, when Daphne is shown to be always prepared by having spare Scooby snacks in her boots. This evolution of the shoe in the mud scene from a moment to show Daphne's vanity into showing Daphne's forward thinking and problem solving is wonderful, as it shows young girls how to find positive solutions. Now showing, instead of vanity, women's ingenuity. The Cartoon Network Reboot. Despite having reruns, iconic specials, and crossovers on Cartoon Network, the channel didn't get its own original Scooby-Doo series till 2010, 4 years after Kids WB shut down. Now, what many don't know is that Cartoon Network Studios is owned by Warner Brothers Television Studios, bringing clarity in retrospect why Cartoon Network also had its own Looney Tunes show in 2011, and why both shows had some of the same developers and comedic style. This new Scooby-Doo series was called Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, and is highly ranked by fans as one of the best series because of its vintage style and serial instead of standalone storyline, something that hadn't been done since the 80s show 13 Ghosts. What made the show interesting was that it focused on subverting all expectations up to that point of what a Scooby-Doo series looked and felt like, with a mysterious message from someone named Mr. E at the end of the first episode, telling us, the audience, that there is a bigger mystery in the background. It also increased the amount of horror and dark fantasy references, like Labyrinth and H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu. Plus, it cameoed beloved characters like Vincent Van Gogh, and even evil older Daphne from the 80s alternate reality. Since Mystery Incorporated was set in one place, it had more time to build out the world and dig deeper into the characters' families and personal relationships. And following a similar thread to the behind-the-scenes Cartoon Network specials, gave every meddling kid disapproving parents, who not only don't support their detective work, but also don't approve of their friends. Daphne's parents in particular, who remind me of Elsa's in Legally Blonde, want her to pursue a rich career like her sisters, Daisy, Dawn, Delilah, and Dorothy. But Daphne has no desire to live the overindulgent and snobbish life of her family. And they especially don't approve of Daphne's affections for Fred. This iteration of Daphne is presented to us straight off the bat without the damsel or fighting complex. Instead, her main conflict in the series is her relationship with Fred Jones, who is constantly leading her on with no real commitment or dedicated attention to her, friend-zoning her in the beginning and letting his obsession with traps blind him from thinking about anything else. This leads Daphne to becoming fed up by episode 7, as she has not only spent too much energy fawning for Fred's attention, but also is hurt by his disregard of her feelings, when he ignores that she's been kidnapped. Heartbroken, she reinvents herself with the help of Thorn, the lead singer of the Hex Girls, who she was impersonating to help catch the villain. Now, I didn't touch on the Hex Girls at all when discussing the Mook movies, wanting to save it for now, but this trio of eco-goths from the 1999 movie The Witch's Ghost are iconic in the fandom, not only for their style, but their music, which is part of the most memorable moments of that movie, and is reminiscent of the song sung by the witches in Hocus Pocus. The Hex Girls give Daphne a rock star makeover, turning her into her alter ego, Crush. And when Fred comes back trying to apologize, having realized his feelings, Daphne kicks him out of the room, much to Velma's approval as she finally stands up for herself. She then writes and performs a song with Thorn to help express her emotions over the push and pull of their relationship and try to get over him. This song is actually pretty decent, having her call out not only his obsession with traps, as the song is called Trap of Love, but also how much she feels imprisoned by him, with lines like, "Your unfailing heart imprisons me, empty words, an iron cage, and it's time we part, set me free, uncage my heart." And uncage her heart she does. Until that is, they get together again at the end of the episode, then dramatically engaged near the end of the season. But that doesn't last either when Fred finds out his dad isn't his dad. He then has a whole identity crisis, splits up the gang, and calls off his engagement to Daphne. In season 2, Daphne's absence from the gang is felt for 3 episodes, with them in episode 2 even trying unsuccessfully to fill the void she left behind. This void is temporarily taken over by hot dog water, going as far as replacing Daphne in the next episode's intro with her to emphasize the switch. But why didn't Daphne return? The main answer is she wanted to try to put everything behind her, as her main motivation in mystery solving was to be with Fred and garner his attention. But now she just wants to be happy, and with someone who pays attention to her. This attention comes from her boyfriend Baylor Hotner, who is a direct parody of Taylor Lautner from the Twilight Saga, which was still releasing its final 2-parter films at the time. Now, she does return to the team again, having missed them a lot, but only because Baylor, conveniently, turns out to be a villain, who was using her to method act being with a small-town girl for his next film. This causes Daphne to return to the team, but it doesn't repair her relationship with Fred. In fact, their dynamic now has switched, with Fred putting in all the effort to try and repair the relationship, and Daphne desperately trying to get him to stop. Eventually, since in this franchise they are destined for one another, they agree to take things slow and return back to their usual dynamic, this time with Fred paying more attention to her. Overall, this version of Daphne is unique because it finally feels like they stopped trying to fix her and are now just letting her be a teenage girl, with all the drama that comes with it. As in the other iterations, the focus was to subvert the damsel narrative and reinvent her. But now, the franchise doesn't have to do that anymore, as she is no longer seen as useless, but needed. The Future of Scooby-Doo. As I said before, there's tons of Scooby-Doo movies, specials, crossovers, and films. From her tiny appearances in Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, her live-action moments in The Mystery Begins, plus Daphne and Velma, to versions where she can't drive, does stand-up comedy, has a clumsy complex, still obsesses over Fred, and even a whole movie called Scooby-Doo and the Curse of the 13th Ghost that shows her off as a tough girl with a past, referencing endlessly the 80s. But moving away from the 2010s, the 2020s for Scooby-Doo has been semi-wild so far. Not only is the franchise in a weird spot because traditional broadcasting has switched to a million different streaming platforms, but all the new media for Scooby-Doo appear to be surrounding some sort of plan of targeting as many different audiences as possible, with each new version in this decade being a completely different vibe. From the 2019 to 21 Scooby-Doo and Guess Who series, designed for lovers of the original, a plethora of direct-to-DVD movies that feature cartoon crossovers and nostalgia, the 3D animated kids film Scoob in 2020, updated to the times for Young Gen Alpha, the controversial adult cartoon Velma for the quote-unquote woke crowd, to the yet-to-be-released anime Go-Go Mystery Machine and the mysterious Netflix live-action announcement. The franchise appears to be trying anything and everything to stay relevant and grab fans. So, after all of that, let's answer our question. Who is Daphne Blake? She is a character who has been the most consistently revisited and evolved over the entire 50 years plus history of Scooby-Doo. A teenager who talks like Thalia Menninger and looks and thinks like Nancy Drew. She is an observant and compassionate character, not afraid to hit someone over the head. A vain girl labeled danger prone and seen as a joke. Someone who grew into herself and became outgoing. A career woman who is stronger as an adult and fascinated with the supernatural. An ex-damsel, now the team's fighter. A girl girl in love with a boy and determined to be a detective against her family's wishes. At times clumsy, but always prepared, an appreciated and valued member of the gang. All of this is Daphne Blake. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was an unexpected documentary, and after having written 20 pages, I am just so relieved to have this massive research video out to you guys. To those who don't know me, hello, my name is Karina. I am a costume technician, researcher, and artisan who goes by Kartsy on social media, and for the past 3 years, I have been bringing to life the mystery gang from Scooby-Doo. Next time, we will return to the world of sewing for the Daphne Blake cosplay and wardrobe reveal. Daphne is so fashionable as a character that she opens the doors for tons of conversations on all sorts of interesting trends in the 1960s. But besides that, we'll also see her wardrobe reveal and what comes next in this Scooby-Doo cosplay adventure. So if you're interested in historical fashion, research videos, sewing, and cosplay, make sure to like and subscribe. See you guys next time.